I think people have to understand the importance of all of this. We have arrived at the time spoken about by Jesus, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be. The flood came because this whole earth had degenerated into a zoo, a morphology of terror and corruption and debauchery and perversion, and that's exactly where we are today, aren't we, Steve?
Yes, and the thing that we're trying to get across is an issue of bloodlines. Now, let me describe the bloodlines. The giants, as we know them in history, for instance, Goliath. When Goliath was slain by David, that hybrid spirit that was half human and half fallen angel, and don't forget Goliath had brothers. In 1st or 2nd Samuel, it talks about the reason David took 5 smooth stones was in order to take on Goliath's brothers too. I mean, that speaks to the zeal that King David had for the Lord of hosts. And the mockery still goes on today, Sheila. We've talked about this on your show before in the past. The reason the Illuminati has to tell the people on Earth what they're going to do is so that primarily the people on Earth cannot be without excuse. In other words, they're indicting us for our stupidity. The main thing about Genesis 6 giants is both before the flood and after the flood, it explains everything. I call it the Rosetta Stone of history. The Rosetta Stone was found in Rosetta, Egypt, 35 miles, I think, south of Alexandria, and basically taught Greek-speaking people how to decipher hieroglyphics. That's how we learned, and it was during the reign of Napoleon Bonaparte. So when I say Genesis 6 is the Rosetta Stone of history, it explains the master builders. It explains the technology. And doesn't that blow your mind, Sheila, that Francis Bacon knew about those high-tech devices that absolutely, in 1627? I mean, until Tim presented that, of all the stuff I've read, I missed that, okay? So precept upon precept, God is revealing the hidden secrets, the hidden mysteries that we might all come to the understanding of. And it's incredibly, how should I say it? It's marvelous. And that's why I think the psalmist said, "Oh Lord, how marvelous are thy works, and your ways past finding out." But now the scripture is fulfilling the words of Jesus that there's nothing that's been hidden that isn't going to be revealed. I just got an email, Tim and Sheila, while we were, getting set up to do the show, and someone said, well, why, if all this advanced technology existed, why did Noah have to use primitive means to build the ark? Why did it take so long? Well, in judging the fallen angels and their civilizations, the fury of Almighty God at what the fallen angels had introduced to mankind is fully manifest in the flood. And the book of Enoch, again, talks about the fallen angels knowing that this judgment's going to come upon them. So in God's, I would say, this righteous and holy indignation, he hid, he destroyed, he covered, he basically made it so, so obvious that he was against the technological revelations to mankind because it only destroyed them. I guess we rest our cases. We watch our world ready to be destroyed in our generation to such a degree that Jesus said if the days weren't shortened for the elect's sake, there would be no flesh left alive. So why is the Rosetta Stone? Genesis 6, chapter 4, there were giants in those days and after those days. Again, those days are the days of Noah. Obviously, King Og and the giant brothers of, David, Goliath, and others were sought out and basically to be destroyed because God sent his fear, and I believe that the people have got to understand this. The giants fled to every part of the known world after the flood, and this is what I would call the second corruption, the second introduction. So when Tim and the expedition crew went into South America, for the first time in history, I believe, there has never been the addressing, and it wasn't God's time yet, of supernaturally built architecture that was prior to the flood of Noah and post-flood Noah. Tim, how high is Lake Titicaca? 13,000?
Oh, it's over 12,000 feet for sure.
12,000, okay. Yeah, 12,000 feet. And what happened to Lake Titicaca was at sea level, the whole thing rose. It would be considered an upthrust.
And with Lake Titicaca and Peru, even Francis Bacon, basically, all roads didn't lead to Rome. All roads lead to Peru. And one of the fascinating things is my contention that Easter Island and some of the other islands that lie beneath the sea were one time attached to the mainland, and the Moai, M-O-I, statues on Easter Island, it was only 2 years ago that anybody thought to maybe dig down and see what was underneath them. They found that these statues were extremely tall, and they were, again, the Moai were facing, on a hill, and they were facing, I think, was either the rising sun or the setting sun. The point being is that the history of giants is the history of human race and technology. Now, let me go back. Let's take Goliath. When he died, that hybrid spirit, not totally human, not totally fallen angel, walked the earth. And what's fascinating is Jesus told us and tells us what happens to the unclean spirits when they go out. Now, I'm going to want everybody to fast forward. So all the most evil entities in the history of the world, you can basically just go and find them. Even the spirit of Nero, I think basically he set up shop in Washington, D.C., as you know, I no longer will address the White House as a White House. Maybe we ought to call it, the Color House, but I call it the Slaughterhouse. And I think it was John Whitehead now who's picked up the term, and maybe he didn't hear from me, but the Slaughterhouse. And so what you have in the history of the world now, we've got the point coming of incarnation. The Human Genome Project can have all these noble medical outward statements, but at the heart of the matter is this. Genetic engineering now and the ability to reconstitute specific entities for the rehabilitation of the spirits that originally left them is got to be one of the most unusual, I think, no one's ever addressed this that I know of. Do you know of anybody, Tim, that's ever addressed that? Because you're a pretty well-read guy. The fact that the Human Genome Project is looking to recreate bodies for the disembodied spirits of these entities. So what I'm saying is this is a unique revelation. Not that it was given to me, not that it was given to Tom Horn or whoever else. I'm not taking credit for anything, I'm just saying it. But it had to be at this time. It had to be at the time that God said, now it's time to reveal that. And I think this is where we're at. So given the issue now that we are in a position to simply come to the point of dealing with these guys, these let's say this reincarnated giants, the technology that's been hidden, the knowledge they had is going to be reestablished. That's why Jesus said, and I wish people could get this, there has never been a time like it, nor would be again, and except the days be shortened, there be no flesh left alive. Right now, someone says, well, what are you working on, Steve? Well, Tim and I are working on the integration of what went on in South America and how the giants spread up through Latin America, first of all, Central America, then into Mexico, then into the Ohio River Valley. And what's totally lost to most people is when you've got Smithsonian archaeologists in the Grand Canyon, Professor Kincaid, talking about the Egyptian citadels, when everything in the Grand Canyon used to have Egyptian names, how did that come to be? Well, obviously, Smithsonian denies that Professor Kincaid ever existed due to the bias by a gentleman named Mr. Powell. Lake Powell is named after him. The idea that I want people to understand today is that, well, Babylon was being built, if you will, as a ziggurat to the heavens, and God had to confound the language. We've got Mystery Babylon now doing on a level and scale that historical Babylon couldn't even touch. And that's what we're believing that we'll be able to demonstrate to the people through the findings on the expedition.
Let me say one thing, Steve. That question you got, why didn't Noah use the advanced technology to build the ark? Well, there's a number of reasons, but going back to Pember, George Pember in his book, Earth's Earliest Ages, made a fascinating observation that I never really heard any other preachers preach about or mention, and it's this, that two things were happening simultaneously on the earth among the children of Adam. You have the line of Seth, who Pember describes, and I think very rightly so, as patiently awaiting their redemption that they knew was to come. Their hope, they understood from what height they had fallen. Obviously, Adam and Eve were still alive. They were telling them about the wonders and the glories of the garden and walking with God in the cool of the day. So the line of Seth, the righteous, were waiting for redemption, for the rectification of their fallen condition, so that they could be restored so that they could be redeemed, forgiven, restored to what their parents had. That was what was going on with the line of Seth. That's what they were looking forward to. Whereas the line of Cain, the rebellious line, the wicked, were building the cities, were developing the technology, eventually under the guidance of the fallen angels and their children. We're looking to create these vast kingdoms, and we're fighting with each other, and we're looking to amass wealth, and we're greedy. And they were the ones who were using that technology and who were embroidered in all that was going on with the fallen angels. But Enoch, at the same time, was teaching. That's what his name means, to instruct, to teach. He was teaching the righteous the way that they should walk, the way that they should live, and he was pointing them towards, and in the book of Enoch, this is the man that he was pointing them towards, that Son of Man who was to come. That's who Enoch was preparing the righteous, was what he was preparing the righteous for, was to receive the Son of Man, was to receive the one who was coming. That's what the line of Seth, in other words, the righteous in the earth, were doing during everything that was going on in the pre-flood world. And that's why Noah did not use the technology of the fallen. He didn't use it. He wasn't corrupted in his genes, and he wasn't corrupted in any other way. He wasn't using the technology of the fallen ones. And that, I believe, is the most adequate explanation why Noah didn't use that technology. It was available, but it was forbidden. And so he obviously built the ark according to the layout that God gave him. Okay, so now getting to our trip in Peru and what we saw there. We were in the Altiplano and around Lake Titicaca, and we were also around the area, the Cusco region. Both of these areas, in fact, all throughout Peru, in fact, all throughout South America, but especially in Peru and Bolivia, you can find what we believe are remnants of the pre-flood architecture, of some of the structures that stood in the world before the flood, and therefore evidence for this technology that we're referring to, this pre-flood forbidden high technology that was introduced by the science, let's call it, the pre-flood science that was introduced by the fallen ones, by the archangels, the dark angels, the fallen angels that fell in the pre-flood world. And what we found in, we went to Tiwanaku, which is in Bolivia, and like Steve said, we went to Sacsayhuaman, which is an amazing, let me say this, Sacsayhuaman, which is located literally right in Cusco. It's right on the outskirts of Cusco. You get in a taxi and you drive for 10 minutes, and you're at Sacsayhuaman, which it's basically up on a hill overlooking the city of Cusco. It's one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. And I say this in the documentary. If there's any place on this planet that looks like it was built by giants, maybe outside of Baalbek, it is Sacsayhuaman. I mean, the dimensions and the size of the stones that were used, and just the way that they're molded together, we believe that they were somehow either poured into place, or they were the actual stone, the actual rock was poured into place, or somehow they were able to soften the stone by changing the molecular structure. And that we cover that in part 2 of our first episode, which is called Technology of the Fallen. And but what's really interesting is that, we're obviously not the only ones to have gone to these locations. These are very famous locations. They're big tourist locations. We weren't the only ones there. These are places that are visited, all year long by tourists. And certain other individuals have gone to these places. I know that Eli Marsuli went to Sacsayhuaman and to Cusco, but our intention in going was basically it was twofold. It was more than twofold, but we had two primary objectives. Actually, three primary objectives. The first was to go. We're always looking for evidence of giants, and we knew that Peru was definitely one of the places that you need to go to if you're looking for evidence of giants. The second reason was we're looking for evidence of the pre-flood world in general. And again, Peru and Bolivia are one of the best, if not the best places to go to see, to put your hands on. Where you can actually get up close and put your hands on what we believe is pre-flood architecture. And the third reason was to follow up on the research of David Flynn that many people are not aware of, that David Flynn actually discovered these geoglyphs while viewing satellite images over the Lake Titicaca region around Peru and Bolivia. So those are our three primary objectives. And what fascinates me is that there is so much information surrounding, let's pick one of all of those places. Let's pick one of them. Let's pick Tiwanaku in Bolivia. There's so much information concerning giants, concerning ancient technology, concerning other, let's say, non-human entities that were involved in that civilization and in the building of the structures at Tiwanaku. And yet, none of these shows, the popular shows I've seen on television and the documentaries, especially the Ancient Alien stuff, ever even talk about that stuff. They focus on all these other things for which there is no or very scant evidence. In other words, that the ruins that are found at Pumapunku were somehow a landing platform for flying saucers. I mean, absolutely asinine conjectures based on very little evidence, and actually even based on not even that much rubble. There's not even that much ruins there to make such to concoct such a conjecture. But what is evident? What is evident in stone, and what is evident in the ancient documents? I mean, the 16th century documents concerning Tiwanaku, and what is ancient in the traditions and the stories of the natives themselves concerning Tiwanaku, is that there once existed a race of giants. And that Tiwanaku, Pumapunku, which is in Tiwanaku, was built before the Great Flood that destroyed the whole earth, that destroyed everything. This is what the Incas say. This is what the conquistadores believed. This is what the Jesuits, the Jesuit priests and the Augustine and the Dominican priests that went to Tiwanaku right after the Conquista believed and wrote about. This was the consensus. The consensus was that it was not only Tiwanaku, also Sacsayhuaman, and Ollantaytambo. The consensus was that these were pre-flood places, and they were most probably built by giants. And why do they say most probably built by giants? And when I say they, I'm referring to some of the chroniclers, the Spanish chroniclers, that talk about Tiwanaku. The reason why? Because giant skeletons, corpses, have been discovered in every one of those places, especially beneath the ruins of Tiwanaku. A giant corpse was dug up. I mean, elongated skulls are discovered. And not only elongated skulls, but giants with elongated skulls. And these are in the documents. And nobody talks about these things. It's all about flying saucers and aliens. It's all about, as Steve always says, the fruit of evil, or the fruits of the antediluvian world, rather than addressing the antediluvian world itself as an incredible, extraordinary reality that ought to really blow everybody's minds and change everything we think we know. It changes everything we think we know about the prehistoric world. Even for most Christians, it changes everything you think you know about the prehistoric world, because we think that, and this is the banal imagery that was shown, for example, in most Sunday school classes, is that the prehistoric world was full of a bunch of guys that weren't very smart, walking around in sandals and animal skins. Now, that might have been true to a certain degree, but what it's ignoring is the fact that, for example, well, let me say this. It's ignoring the fact that science, forbidden science, was ubiquitous all across the pre-flood world. And let me say this, referring to these technologies that Francis Bacon had foreknowledge of in his book, The New Atlantis. The reason why Francis Bacon was able to detail these technologies is because there is nothing new under the sun. That's why he could detail these technologies, because they already existed in times past. That's exactly what Solomon told us, and it is true. There's nothing new under the sun. And he says, what can it be said of that? Hey, this is new. This is new. There's nothing. Nothing is new. And he wasn't just talking about the primitive sciences of the early post-flood world. He was referring to all science. He was referring to all the knowledge, the forbidden knowledge, and the sciences that were known, that were well known before the flood of Noah, that surpass our science that we have today. And in fact, what we have today comes from the roots of the science that was divulged, the forbidden science that was divulged by the fallen angels. So it's really fascinating to go and find evidence in stone of that pre-flood world. And again, it's also very fascinating to see how everybody ignores it. I shouldn't say everybody, but how so many people ignore what's right in front of their faces, and in the place of just taking the Bible at what it says, specifically Genesis 6, and looking at these ruins and coming up with the same conclusions that the Inca did, the same conclusions that the conquistadors did, the same conclusions that the Spanish chroniclers and the Jesuit priests did when they looked at the same ruins, and saying, hey, here's proof of the pre-flood world. This place was destroyed by the flood. Oh, and there's also giants. The giant bones were found here, so we can infer that the giants had something to do with this. And it really is amazing, Steve and Sheila, that we're not the first ones to say this, I don't think, but I've never seen a documentary where people go to Tiwanaku and say, hey, look, these are pre-flood ruins, and by the way, a large giant skeleton was found under here.